Welcome to the Cuckoo's Nest podcast. Our first guest for the year 2021 January, we have Pastor Daniel Baik, hailing from Houston. He has been education pastor for, 12 years?
Well, 12 and a half years in Houston.
Yes.
But before that, all combined is like 25 years or
25
longer.
years
Yeah.
of, was it in education?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
25 years of serving the Lord's churches as education pastor. And now, finally, in January of 2021, he has been called to NBC to assume the role of senior pastor. So we want to welcome him.
Good to be here. I don't know who's all listening or watching, but just want to say hi and glad to be here. It's a blessing to be a part of this. Yes, thank you.
You just arrived here at the end of December, was it?
Yeah, just 1 week before January 1st.
Okay.
So I came here Monday.
I remember you mentioning that.
It was raining and we saw the rainbow.
Yeah.
It was very, very clear and beautiful rainbow. So the day that we were arriving, it was raining. And just as we were entering Orange County, we saw this beautiful rainbow. It was just very, very beautiful, big, clear.
How was the journey? How was the drive? Did you get to do some sightseeing with the family? Or?
Well, it was from Houston to California, so we just took the I-10. It's the highway that crosses the United States, and we stopped by a few cities. We were bringing our third child, which is his name is Pluto, as you can imagine. He's a dog, that we adopted. Yeah. So that's one of the main reasons why we drove instead of flew. Because he's 26 pounds, and so it's so that's one of the reasons. But anyway, we stopped by Tulsa. Where else was it? There are a few other cities that we stopped by, and it was good. We didn't take a long drive. We just took 6 hours each day, so it took us 5 days, 5 nights, or something like that. But it was good. It was just good to spend some time. But as you know, a lot of things were closed down. And it was during the Christmas time. So, most of the things were closed down. But nonetheless, it was very relaxing. So overall, it was very good. It's just the final day as we were arriving, the rainbow just gave us the big welcome. So it was very, very good.
When I first met you, after I met you, I was telling my wife, it's like I'm meeting a grade school friend.
Oh, really?
That's what I told her, and then she said, "Well, that means that you like him."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, that's great. I hope so.
I
hope that's the case." How does it feel to be a senior pastor finally after 25 years of serving the church?
Well, as I was growing up, I always wanted to be a pastor ever since I was a little child. So, being a pastor has always been in the back of my mind. And then I guess when I was really young, I thought being a pastor meant, senior pastor. But then when I start ministry when I was in 2021, I didn't really think, I'm going to be a senior pastor or education pastor or what have you. So it didn't really matter to me as long as I'm in a full-time ministry just serving God. But then as I get older, late 20s or so, the churches that I served, they all expected all the pastors to become lead pastor or senior pastor one day. So you are getting trained when you are 20s and early 30s. So eventually you will be a lead pastor position or senior pastor position. That was the kind of culture that I grew up with. Mm-hmm. So, I thought maybe, that's probably the way that I go. But then when I started doing the ministry in Seoul Baptist Church in Houston 13 years ago, that kind of changed my thoughts and my direction and vision, because the senior pastor at that time, Pastor Chai, was hoping and praying that people like me or, man figure will step into education pastoral role and do it for a long time, until he retires. Mm-hmm. Because we are, I do agree with them that we are in a great need for men to take the position in education, not only the pastoral position, but education as a whole. There's like 90% of all the school teachers are females. I don't know about California, but all the other places that I've been to, all the children's ministry are, majority of them are women. And nothing wrong with having a women children's pastor, but we need a little bit more male leadership in children's ministry, as well as the youth and as well as other education departments. So I thought, okay, if there is a need, I'll be more than willing. If there is a calling and if there is a need, I'm here to serve God, not necessarily become a lead pastor and what have you. So I was, doing that. So I was doing children's ministry for 12 and a half years in Houston. Then, of course, during those times, my friends and the pastors that knew me growing up asked me, questions constantly. Daniel, when are you going to start, start ministry? Or when are you going to start your own ministry? When are you going to start being a senior pastor and all those things? And thinking that was the way to go. And actually, that kind of motivated me even more to stay in children's ministry. And that just tells me, hey, that's why there are such a shortage in children's ministry, like the male children's pastor in all the churches in the world. So I was hoping that I can perhaps be the one who will retire as a children's pastor too. But then as I get older, like, when I was turning 40, mid 40s, I'm 47 right now. So like when I was turning 43, 44, 45, I was thinking, is this the way to go? I'm getting older, and will I be able to reach out to these little children the way that I used to when I was 20s and 30s? That was a little bit different because I'm getting old, and I was very energetic person. I was very upbeat and doing a lot of skits and, jumping up and down and all those kind of things that children's pastor do. But then when I start preaching to kids, I felt like I was preaching to the teachers more so than the kids. I was teaching and reaching out to the parents more so than reaching out to the kids. I have to preach to their levels. But then I felt like I was preaching to the teachers. And teachers were telling me that they are so blessed and they would get so touched by my sermons and all that. But then I don't know how the children's were receiving it, So that was the main one of the reasons why I felt like I need to kind of, move on to the next stage. So that was one reason. And then another reason for perhaps praying that I will be in a different position was because I wanted to reach out to multi-ethnic group of people. I don't just want to exclusively reaching out to Korean people. I love Koreans. I am Korean, but I think God wants us to make disciples of all nations. But my ministry was limited to just the Korean people. And I lived in Houston. So Houston is like one of the most diversified city. So there are my neighbors, my wife's co-workers, and my kids' friends. They're not necessarily all Koreans, and I want them to be invited to my church that I serve, and I want to reach out to them. So that was the main reason why I wanted it to move on to the next stage. Yeah.
I wanted our viewers to get to know you a little bit better, so I'm going to ask some questions about your background. I remember when you first came to our church, you came to do a 3-day revival.
Oh, yeah.
And during the revival, you spoke about your background when you came to the United States. So right now, we're both 1.5 for convenient definition, 1.5 generation pastor.
Okay.
Would you say that you're like more 1.3 or 1.6? Which way do you lean on more?
It's hard for me to say. I think it's for the viewers or the listeners to judge. Well, I definitely have an accent, but then the way that I'm thinking, my culture and my thoughts and customs and things like that is more, I wouldn't even say that I'm closer to second generation, because I feel like second generation Koreans have their own culture. It's not necessarily American culture. Second generation Koreans have their own culture and their customs and other things that are a little bit different from what's called, quote unquote, American culture.
Right.
So I don't know. I feel like sometimes I'm more Americanized than even second generation Koreans.
Right.
But then language wise, I guess I'm more closer to first generation. So I don't know. It's hard to say. It's 1.5. It's yeah, whatever you make out of it. Yeah.
Okay. So would you like to share? I mean, for me, the story of how you came to the United States and then you were dropped off in the East Coast, pretty much. Yeah. And with I forget the name of the gentleman that you lived with in the mountains. What was his name again?
Carl Powers. Yeah.
Carl Powers.
Yeah.
Wow. How long did you live with him?
1 year. Yeah.
Would you like to share some of that?
Yeah. In order to share that story, we have to go all the way back to Korean War in 1950s. You know how the Korean War?
Okay.
And then American soldiers went to Korea to fight for our freedom. But then one of the sergeant, his name was Carl Powers, and he saw this houseboy. They called it houseboy. It's a kind of little Korean boys who runs around in the American soldiers camp, and they do
run errands.
Yeah, run errands and all, help out these soldiers whatever they want and things like that. So Carl took a notice of this one boy, and he wanted to help him. So he thought there's got to be a way to take him to United States so he can get educated. So he thought that was the best way to help Korea and get the leaders, right? So to make a long story short, it was almost like literally very, very hard and almost impossible to take a young boy during the Korean War to take him to United States. It's very difficult anyway. So that's what he did. He took far beyond what was expected and way beyond. So he took this boy to United States and helped him to go to school.
Let me pause it for a second.
Yeah.
Did Carl adopt this young man?
I don't think he adopted him, but maybe
there was some kind of arrangement.
Right, some kind of arrangement. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe not a proper official adoption, but it's almost like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, so he took him to United States, and this boy went to Bob Jones University or Bob Jones College. That's very fundamentalist, right? Fundamentalist school, and he wanted to get a politics, but then he ended up becoming a pastor, and then after he became a pastor, he went back to Korea. So many of you probably have heard his name. His name is Billy Kim. So he was my senior pastor when I was growing up. So that houseboy who grew up to be a pastor and came back to Korea. So anyway, so the Carl was the one who helped him to be who he is today. And then so when Billy Kim, because he was my senior pastor, he knows my dad and he knows about my story, and he knew that I wanted to be a pastor ever since I was a little boy. So he helped me to go to United States. You see how it's a chain reaction? One soldier helped this houseboy, and then this houseboy helps me, and then so forth. So, this Billy sent me to United States, and he sent me to Carl, the American soldier, right? So Carl never been married. He passed away a few years ago, but he never been married, and he lived on this wooden area. It's like at the tip of Appalachian Mountain in Virginia. So, and he was a 7th grade English teacher. And he lived in the mountain. He built his own house. He had an outhouse, and he had a wood stove. He didn't even have a car, so we had to walk around. And it was, even though it was 30 years ago, it was a culture shock. It's even 30 years ago, Korea, I didn't use the outhouse, and you know what I mean. So so it was quite a change.
did you live in the U.S. Continually since living with Carl?
Yeah,
Oh,
right,
wow.
right. Since so 30 years straight.
Wow.
And-
Since
but-
then.
Yeah, since then. But then,
Wow.
of course, I visited Korea, for summer, like for a few weeks and things like that. But that's not really. That was just visiting.
Mm-hmm.
But then, prior to that, just before I came to the United States, I never, spoke English really. I mean, 30 years ago, back in Korea, their public school English class weren't really that good. You know what I mean? So I wasn't able to speak at all. All I can say was, hello, my name is so and so, how are you? I'm fine, and you? Those type of conversation.
Sure.
So it was very difficult for me to communicate. And even though I didn't know how to ask questions, and even if they answer some of my questions, I didn't understand, and so it was very hard for me to communicate. But as I said, I learned the culture, how to, do proper things, and I can go on hours and hours talking about that experience. Like even the churches that I went, their churches are, one of those movies where the southern pastors like preach like crazy, like that. Yeah, you know what I mean?
That's what I try to do on Sundays.
Oh yeah, nice try.
I try to do that on Sundays.
Maybe we should do that both. Maybe I'll do it in Korean and you do it in English.
I can't pull it off.
Yeah, so it was like that. So church was also culture shock as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, school, and I think it was a culture shock for them as well as for me, because they never seen any
Right.
Asian before in their whole life.
Right.
The entire school, and entire county for that matter. So they were so shocked to see this Asian boy who came from Korea,
Yeah.
and then he can't even speak a word of English. So they were very curious and they wanted to help. They were very friendly and kind, most of them. So I didn't feel any racism. Maybe I didn't know, but I didn't really feel like there was any kind of racism or things like that. But they were very welcoming. They were very kind. They were very friendly. So I was able to go to school. Yeah.
Did the initial time of the period of adjustments, I'm sure there was difficulty. Did it build your faith a little bit?
Oh, very, very much. Every single night I was crying. As
Really?
I was going to bed, I missed my family and friends like crazy.
my.
Yeah, you can imagine. You're living in the mountain, and with the 할아버지 and a dog. He had a dog, and that was it. And every night, there's nothing out there. When you just go out, there's just wood.
I mean,
Yeah.
So when I hear your story, right?
Yeah.
I grew up reading Adventures of Tom Sawyer.
It's if it's not worse than that, it's like that. Yeah.
So I when I hear your story, I romanticize it. I
I
think to myself, wow, a boy of 16. I mean, what an adventure.
Yeah.
But for you, it was like a nightmare.
Well, it wasn't a nightmare. It was like an adventure.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was so lonely.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
So
okay.
that was the thing that helped me, because here is a boy who was hoping to be a pastor one day,
Yeah.
who will be a servant of God. You can think of it like that. And then, so I have a big dream, and Billy Kim was a big figure. So back then, I thought that I will become someone like Billy Graham. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And like Billy Kim,
sure.
Billy Graham. Yes, I'm gonna preach the gospel to the world, and all that stuff. So
okay.
I thought this is part of my training. Yeah.
Mission training.
Yeah. So in order for me to bloom and do that, so this is my training. So I'll be willing to take it in
Yeah.
and bring it on. But it was so hard because you are 16 years old, stuck in the woods, and I used the real axe to cut down the trees and split the woods every day. That was the only way that we can get the warm water and get the fire going in the wood stove. So every day, even during the summertime, we have to burn the woods. So yeah, it was a training. I got poison ivy twice. I got stung by bee a few times, and all that was very painful. But once again, I thought I was getting trained.
I
So,
also
and it was a training. Yeah.
I also remember you said that you ate a lot of potatoes.
Oh yeah. I mean, Carl, you can imagine he was 61 years old, and
Oh.
he wasn't a great cook. He just lived by himself, so he
Right,
just
right.
ate the canned food and planted some vegetables like potatoes, and we ate potatoes all day. Sometimes I ate baked potato for breakfast, fried potato for lunch, and for dinner we just had leftover potatoes. So yeah.
After you grew older, were you able to go and visit him and?
Yeah, for a few times.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I wasn't able to attend his funeral. I found out later that, so it was a little too late, and it was very. I wish, I was able to attend, and that was one thing that I kind of wish that I was able to do. But
Wow.
yeah.
Wow, what a nice man that.
Yeah. He taught many kids in school, but he also went above and beyond, and helped out this stranger from another country.
Right.
And that, I'm sure he has a lot of rewards in heaven.
Yeah.
And
It's probably like a special assignment from God. God says,
Yeah.
you got to help that boy, and, and he listened
Yeah.
and he
Yeah.
obeyed.
Yeah,
Hallelujah.
Yeah, even if you are helping one person,
Yeah.
and that one person can do so much, work for God, and every person is a precious to God.
I think our ESC members would be interested to know that while you were in high school, you played basketball, and you had an interesting story.
I never played the official kind of school team games. When you played basketball back in Korea 30 years ago, you just played on the streets with the boys, just like how you were playing soccer, out there in the field. So I didn't know the rules too much, and I didn't know the time. Like, they were playing 8 minutes each for 4 quarters, right?
Okay.
And I didn't even know that. The very first game, I thought we're just playing first half and second half. So after second period, I thought the game was over. When they all go into the locker room, I thought game was over, so I was taking off my uniform to take shower.
Oh.
But that was during the halftime.
Oh.
You know what I mean? So, but then I was the only one who's doing this. I was like, isn't it over? But then, there was a
awkward.
third period. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's like that. I
Yeah.
just have to constantly kind of watch other kids doing. It's because I didn't understand anything what they were saying. So, but then, that game, we went back and we were playing third period,
Yeah.
and then we were playing fourth period. So I didn't know how long are we playing.
Yeah.
I was getting cramp, and I was dying. I was running so hard. But then that day, it was not just the one game either. It was a tournament.
Oh.
So we were
Right.
playing 2 games
Oh my.
and on the same day. So yeah, it was really like
Well,
I was.
at least you didn't speak English back then. I mean, I still do that. You gotta ask my wife. I still do things like that, even
Yeah.
though, you know. Another thing that was really poignant about the 3-day revival, I really wish that the ESC would have been able to take advantage of it. Was when you introduced your father, because the whole theme of the revival was the father's heart, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, would you care to share a little bit about your dad?
Yeah, speaking of that, I mentioned about Carl, right?
Yeah.
So in order to speak about my dad, I also have to go back to Korean War. And then there was another gentleman from Chicago. His name was Pastor Swanson. Pastor Swanson is the one who founded this nonprofit organization called Compassion. Many of you probably know about Compassion, and there's also another one called the World Vision.
Right.
Both of them started to help out the Korean orphans during the Korean War.
Yeah.
So many nonprofit organizations like that started because of the Korean War, and because of so many orphans were there in 1950s and 60s. But anyway, this Pastor Swanson went to Korea to help out the American soldiers at first, but then he noticed that there were literally hundreds of thousands of orphans in Korea. They're on the streets. So his heart was really broken. So he wanted to help out. So after he came back to Chicago, he was praying, and some people randomly sent him some support and letters to encourage him to go back. So he went back to Korea, and then he was helping out this orphanage in Masan, I think, and that was how he started sponsoring and supporting these orphans in this Korean orphanage, and that's how the compassion started. But then, how does that story connected to my dad? Is that my dad grew up with my dad's grandmother. Okay, his parents passed away when he was younger, so he was growing up with his grandma, and then one day this pastor stopped by and told the grandma and my dad that, hey, there's an orphanage right there. If you send your grandson to orphanage, then they're gonna help him to get educated, go to school. You can imagine 1950s, going to school was a luxury. So my dad, really wanted to go to school and get, study. So he said goodbye to the grandma, and then he went to this orphanage to study and go to school. He was just hoping that he can attend the school. And that's where he met Pastor Swanson. So Swanson wanted to sponsor this few orphans, and my dad was one of them. So he went to orphanage. My dad was sent to orphanage just to go to school. And then Pastor Swanson took a notice of few boys. So Pastor Swanson started sponsoring few orphans in the orphanage.
Yeah.
So my dad was one of them. So that's why he was able to go to school, attend, middle school, high school, and then was able to go to college, a Bible college.
Oh.
So he became a pastor, and then he started working for Compassion in Korea after college. But then those days, Compassion in Korea was to help the Koreans. But then as you know, the economy grew so fast and so big. So in early 19, I'm not sure what year, maybe 70s or 80s, the Compassion in Korea decided to close down Korea campus because Korea no longer needs help. They grew so fast, so they want to focus on other countries that needed more help. So they closed down the Compassion office in Korea. So my dad, started different ministry. He got into pastoring a church, as well as he started the nursing home. He made a nonprofit organization named after Pastor Swanson. So Swanson Remembrance or Memorial Nursing Center for the old folks who doesn't have kids to take care of them. So they didn't have anywhere to go, but it was free.
Oh,
so
wow.
the only way they can get in there was if you don't have any children to take care of them. Then they have nowhere to go, right? And we accepted those people, and so he's been doing that for 30 some years, and he retired. And then in those days, the Compassion went back to Korea, and this time not to help Koreans, but Korea will become like the headquarters.
Mission
And then
headquarters.
Koreans will help out the other countries or surrounding countries. So they have a Compassion in Korea now, and we have a very close connection with them and good relationship with my dad and things like that. So that's my dad. And going back to that one person, the one man had a heart, went to Korea and helped out these orphans, and I am the product of that heart and compassion.